Man, oh man, have you ever seen the business world shifting at such a maniacal pace as it is right now? It's exciting, but it can also be a little bit daunting. And you know that culture is the backbone of success, especially during this change. If you have a strong, intentional culture inside your organization, then you can drive growth, innovation, and engagement. But creating real culture change often seems overwhelming, leaving you unsure where to start or how to make it successful. That's why I'm thrilled to welcome Jamie Notter, co-author of the new book, Culture Change Made Easy, to the Business of Story. Hi, I'm your host, Park Howell, and today, Jamie will demystify the process of culture change, showing how storytelling is a powerful tool to inspire, align, and empower your team through transformation. With clear, actionable strategies, you'll learn how to craft a narrative that connects your people to your vision of change. So if you're ready to lead your organization with clarity and confidence, tune into this episode. Let's harness the power of story to shape a culture that drives success. Last week, I did a webinar for Gregory Shepard's Startup Science to help entrepreneurs use the ABT framework to tell their startup story in the most clear and compelling way. Now, if you don't know about Gregory Shepard, well, he simply sold his startup to eBay for nearly $1 billion. So he knows something about the startup world. Gregory heard me speak at the Ace Tech conference in Whistler, Canada, and was so blown away by the power of the ABT that I introduced to that tech crowd that he invited me to present it to the members of his startup science organization. One of the examples I used in that webinar last week was the one that I think really demonstrates the theme of today's show as well, about culture change. It's when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007. And of course, Jobs knew a thing or two about startups, innovation, and change on a global scale. So let's walk through that real quick so I can show you how the ABT plays into change storytelling. Jobs walks out and sets the stage in what we call a statement of agreement, or Act 1, if you will. Check this out.
Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device.
Then he introduces the problem that he is addressing by confronting the unimaginative status quo of the current mobile phone market. And he systematically throws BlackBerry, Palm Trio, Nokia E62, and Moto Q phones under the bus.
What's wrong with their user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there. It's this stuff right here. They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not to be there. And they all have these control buttons that are fixed in plastic and are the same for every application. Well, every application wants a slightly different user interface, a slightly optimized set of buttons just for it. And what happens if you think of a great idea 6 months from now? You can't run around and add a button to these things. They're already shipped. So what do? It doesn't work because the buttons and the controls can't change. They can't change for each application, and they can't change down the road if you think of another great idea you want to add to this product.
So it's pretty cool how he sets up the audience in Act 1 with that statement of agreement, the 3 things he's going to include in the iPhone. Then he creates a compelling contrast about the problem he's solving for in Act 2 in what we call the but statement of contradiction. And of course, that but statement begs the question, so what's the answer to this problem? Which he reveals the way forward in Act 3, in this case, the therefore statement of consequence.
Another great idea you want to add to this product. Well, what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen. We're going to use the best pointing device in the world. We're going to use a pointing device that we're all born with. We're born with 10 of them. We're going to use our fingers. We're going to touch this with our fingers. And we have invented a new technology called multi-touch, which is phenomenal. It works like magic. You don't need a stylus. It's far more accurate than any touch display that's ever been shipped. It ignores unintended touches. It's super smart. You can do multi-finger gestures on it. And boy, have we patented it.
I didn't have time during my webinar to play these 3 clips. So what I did is I just simply wrote out the following ABT and shared it with the attendees. And it's really great because it enables you to see how Jobs uses this same framework of setup problem resolution to focus his iPhone launch. And then, of course, I invited people like you to go ahead and watch the launch for yourself on YouTube. But here's his ABT. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a breakthrough internet communicator, and a revolutionary mobile phone. But the problem with existing smartphones is that they're complicated, clunky, and frustrating because they're not very smart or easy to use. Therefore, you will change the way you communicate, connect, and live by accessing all 3 platforms on Apple's new iPhone through a remarkable user interface called multi-touch that is far more accurate and intuitive than any other technology. There you have it. Setup, problem, resolution. Agreement, contradiction, consequence. A framework to storytelling that our primal, pattern-seeking, problem-solving, decision-making, buying brain absolutely adores. So let's dive a bit deeper into how to introduce, manage, and accelerate positive change in your organization through storytelling.
People tell me all the time, oh, people resist change. I'm like, no, they don't. They resist doing things they think are stupid. Right? They resist doing things they think are not in their interests. But if you can tell a clear and compelling story that says, no, I know we did it this way and it used to work. Here's why this is not working now. If we do it this way, you'll get the results you want. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. You know what I mean? And so that piece is super important to me.
Jamie is an author, consultant, and leading expert on workplace culture. His 20-year consulting career is focused on creating amazing workplace cultures that drive real results. And his 4 popular business books have helped leaders navigate the transition away from traditional management and toward the emerging future of work. He holds a master's degree in conflict resolution from George Mason University and a certificate in organization development from Georgetown. Today, we're going to explore concepts in his new book, Culture Change Made Easy, so you can make it easy too. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Jamie Notter. Well, hello, Jamie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you again. You and I met 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
I know.
We were both speaking at a Goodwill international event out in the East Coast somewhere, and I don't even remember where that was. You had just come out with your book, Humanize, How People-Centric Organizations Succeed in a Social World, and I think yours is the first and last book I ever read all in one sitting from the West Coast to the East Coast. So thank you for that. And it was great to meet you there and here. And so I was really interested to learn about your new book coming out and what is the latest state of culture development so companies can be successful. So welcome, and let's begin with that question. First, let's talk about your new book. What is it about? Why'd you write it?
Well, the title is Culture Change Made Easy, And my co-author is my business partner, also Maddie Grant, and this is our fourth book. Humanize was our first. And the entire time, the entire trajectory of all of our books has been about helping leaders adapt to what we call the future of work, right? Like leadership and management has been evolving, and actually starting about 10 or 15 years ago, started to be transforming at a faster pace. There was old management we did in the 1950s, and now there's this new thing and we don't know what it is. And as that has been evolving, we realized culture is at the root of it. If you don't make sure that you are actively managing your culture, you are going to miss out on these trends. And so this is sort of the fourth book that have all been about culture in one way or another. This is the first one that's actually explicitly about culture. Here's how you can change your culture, and here are the core culture patterns that most people don't see that are messing with your success.
So, Jamie, it seems to me in this day and age that managing and really nurturing a culture is a no-brainer. And yet more and more of these books are coming out. What are you seeing out there? Are businesses really not paying attention to culture inside their doors?
I think the summary right now is everyone is talking the talk and nobody's walking the walk. So everyone is saying, wow, we need to pay attention to culture. Workplace culture is important. I think it's been really in the last 10 or 15 years with sort of the millennial generation and the generation after them that are coming into the workforce now. Those generations care more about culture. They care more about being successful in their role and having organizations that are paying attention to their needs. And so people know this is important. People don't know what to do. Like they get to that moment where they have to take action and say, let's work on our culture. And someone says, well, how do we do that? And then they change the subject because nobody knows how to do it. Our argument is it's not rocket science, but you have to be clear about it and you have to do it well. And most leaders did not grow up learning how to do this. And so they don't want to look bad. And so they stick either at a very high level or they don't do anything at all.
Yeah. Well, you can't grab a millennial by its tail, swing it around your head, and not hit a culture consultant or leadership guru these days. So it seems like there's a commodity of people providing advice out there, and yet there's still such a huge need. Is it that people just aren't taking the time to actually learn how to work with their culture?
I think that in my view, the biggest challenge is we jump too quickly to solutions, right? So it's like there are a million consultants out there, a million books you can read on creating better organizations. And they all are based on a model that roughly says, well, we've figured out what the good organization looks like. Here it is, you need to do this. And our experience in the last 10 years working on workplace culture has been, you need to start by understanding what your culture actually is. If you don't know that, then whatever you do is going to be off the whole time. You know what I mean? And so seeing your real culture patterns and realizing, wow, some of these patterns are fine. Some of these patterns are getting in the way. And then figuring your change out from there and saying, oh, well, the ones that are getting in the way, we need to fix those. The ones that are good, we need to reinforce those. And building a whole change plan that's based on reality as opposed to an imaginary model is, I think, the biggest problem. We love imaginary models. We love quick solutions. And it doesn't work that way with culture. You can change it quickly or quicker than most people think, but it's got to start from the reality of your current culture, and that's where we're off.
What are some examples of these modalities that are getting in the way in culture that people are missing, and yet they're a huge roadblock for the success of the company?
So the first culture pattern that we identified in our research is one of the most important right now, because as I'm like, I don't know how many of your podcasts lately that you've been recording are all about AI, but everything has to be about AI these days, right? And AI is very popular. Well, one of the culture patterns that we spotted is called incomplete innovation. So most organizations that we run into, if I ask them, do you care about innovation? Do you care about creating new value? They're like, absolutely. It's really important these days. I'm like, great. So your culture values innovation? Like, yes, we do. When we then measure it and look under the surface, what we see is they generally value the concepts of innovation. They value creativity. They value thinking about the future. They don't want to be stuck in the past. Those are real values inside the culture, right? That's a part of the culture there. What's a little bit less valued are things like taking risks or beta testing things, right? Taking something unfinished and showing it to a customer, right? Or anything related to failure, right? Like being able to fail. Like, oh no, well, we don't do that. Like we don't experiment because our customers want perfection. So if we experimented, we would fail. I'm like, well, then you're not learning, right? So those are the practices of innovation. And if you constantly overvalue the concepts of innovation and undervalue the practices of innovation, you don't get a lot of innovation. And this is particularly important right now because you are not going to succeed. I don't care what your industry is. You are not going to succeed adopting AI if you can't run experiments, right?
God, I know
really
that.
too fast. So,
Yeah, no, in that, Jamie, so what you're saying is people love the story and the imaginary world of innovation and like to call themselves innovative, but they don't want to go through the struggles and the tyranny of innovation. It's a little bit like, gosh, I sit here and I want to get a six-pack on my belly, not just put one in my mouth. I want to be able to run a 10K, but man, do I hate crunches and my knees hurt, so I'm just going to walk. So, I mean, it's like I have all the best ambitions, but do nothing with it.
No, and they don't. And what's interesting to me is that they don't see the connection. Like, this is what's interesting about the culture patterns that we're finding in our research that we write about in the book. It's like you don't get that in your culture, you value people being right all the time, right? You value smart people, and that's a fine value to have. I want you to have smart people, and I want them to give good answers. But we push too hard on that sort of commitment to having smart people, that we create an environment where no one would ever say, hey, I got this new AI thing and I tried it out and wow, it didn't work. But I learned from that how to do this better. And now this one's looking a little better. Like, we don't have those conversations because I'm not leading off with, I tried something and it didn't work. And we don't realize that that's what's inhibiting us from this kind of behavior. Like, my favorite example is like going into an organization and realizing that every department is doing its own AI experiments and they're not telling anybody else. Right? They don't tell each other.
The curse of the silo.
Right. And it's not even about like who I report to and that kind of thing. It's just simply, I'm not going to tell anybody about this experiment until it's good enough to show. Challenges, 3 departments all go to IT at the same time and say, hey, I've got this new AI thing I've been working on. It's working really well. I need you to build me something around it. And they're like, well, I can't build 3 different things. They're all trained in the same data. You should have come to me 6 months ago.
I'm experiencing that exact same thing. I've been teaching storytelling and story training over almost 20 years now, and I've got the story cycle system that is really fantastic for creating brand story strategy, but it's complicated. And it takes exhaustive discovery and research to make it happen. Well, my friend Sean Schroeder, who went through the process for his digital agency out of Sacramento and a platform they built, a SaaS platform called Mira, to great success, said, let's build an AI around it. And we have spent the last 14 months building this AI. And to your point, I experienced the exact same thing. Jamie, I was like, oh, that sounds great. Oh, I don't know the first thing about AI. Do I really have the time to do this? I want to look innovative. I want to be cutting edge. And even in my brand ethos of Business of Story is about the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling, which I wrote 10 years ago. Well, how prophetic is that? We've got the applied science of AI now to create the bewitchery of this storytelling. And it's working precisely because we're doing what you are recommending. Is I took our very first rough beta out to market with 20 people to get their advice. And, some of it worked, some of it didn't work, got great insights. And now we have a really killer app that we'll be rolling out at the beginning of the year where it will reduce that discovery, research and discovery that could take 2, 3, 4 months, $50,000, and you can do it in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
but it's because I had to actually get out of my head that, gee, I'm innovative, but then actually go and do the work to build that innovation with some very talented people.
Although I will say it's easier for you to do that as an individual, right? Like this is one of my epiphanies. Like when I speak to audiences about culture and AI specifically, I start with You'll like this. It's a classic story, but I start with an image of a troll on a bridge, or a traveler on a bridge with the troll on the other side, right? You can't get through the bridge without going through the troll. And then there's the promised land sitting behind the troll. Like you can see the valley where it's beautiful and you want to go there. And I'm like, here's the metaphor, folks. The traveler, that's you realizing that there's huge potential in AI for your organization, right? You see the potential. The promised land, that's the results. That's where you're actually using AI and driving value and helping your customers, whatever it is, right? And the troll is your culture. There's no way you get to the results without going through your culture. So if your culture isn't and your culture was created when AI didn't exist, or at least when AI as we know it now didn't exist, right? And so your culture values a whole bunch of behaviors that worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And they may get in the way, for instance, like not wanting to look bad, so not doing experiments. They're going to get in the way of you achieving what you want to achieve using AI. And that's sort of one of my core lessons is like all the culture you had, it was great. Like not all cultures are great, but they could be. And even if it's great, it may not be what you need right now because the environment has shifted, which it always will. Therefore, your culture always needs to be shifting, adapting, and being sort of laser focused on what drives success for the people inside your organization in your current context.
Yeah, and it's that culture that bridges you over to that promised land as long as you can get around the trolls. I almost think of the patterns you're talking about, of all the different trolls that are getting in the way of your culture. So you talked about the one innovation pattern. What's another one that commonly comes up?
So probably you referenced this earlier when you mentioned silos. Collaboration is one area where it's not about talking the talk and walking the walk like it is with innovation, but we call the pattern awkward collaboration. Because almost every culture strongly values people working together and helping each other out, right? Like this, I don't run across an organization that's like collaboration. No, why would we do that? Like everybody wants collaboration and thinks it's a good thing, and they actually do it to a fair amount. What we see, the pattern we see in the data is we strongly value collaborative individuals, like individuals helping individuals. That's an anchor of everybody's culture. When groups need to collaborate, it is not valued as much. Right? The silo question, like we still are territorial. We still sort of have these rigid boundaries. Layers in the hierarchy are not good at collaborating with each other. I like my favorite example, also sort of digitally related, but my partner, Maddie, did a lot of digital transformation earlier in her career. She was like a social media consultant back in the 2000s. And she would see this all the time. Hey, we need to upgrade our software. We need to do a real digital transformation and sort of take a leap into this sort of new world. And they all get on the same page around how they're going to do it. And then when they start implementing, some things don't work perfectly. And some people get unhappy and they tell the bosses. Suddenly the bosses are back down in the weeds. Like, hey, I need to go to every status update meeting because somebody's mad. I'm like, well, okay, but that's going to make this thing twice the budget and 3 times the schedule, right? And which happens. And it's because they don't stick with their plan and they don't really understand the decision-making roles, and they're just not good at collaborating when they're at different levels in the hierarchy. And because we're not good at that, we write off big digital projects and say, oh, well, of course, these are complex projects, so they're going to take a long time. They may go over budget, and fall behind schedule. And my answer is like, actually, no, they don't have to. If you are really good at understanding what's required for groups to collaborate effectively, then you wouldn't have these problems. And what's required is this will vary by organization, but it can be things like as simple as creating a green lighting process. So anytime you want to do something new, you have to run it by the management team and they give it a green light. We had an organization that we feature as a case study in the book. They did that. It dramatically reduced the cross-cultural, cross-departmental friction, right? Because when I go and ask, hey, I've got this new project I'm working on, I need your help. And you're like, well, why? Like, why can't you do it yourself? I'm really busy. Did someone approve this? Like, there's all that resistance.
Right. Yeah.
But once the green light process was in part, they're like, oh, this obviously was green lit. I'm like, so how can I help? Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm really busy, so I can't do a lot, but I could do a little. Is that going to be okay? Like, the conversations were much smoother. There was less suspicion. They also did a lot on making their project management more transparent. Once people could see what people are working on, all that stuff kind of faded away. So there are very specific things you can do to address these patterns. Again, they'll vary by organization, but this is part of our message in the book. It's like, you can change this tomorrow, right? That green light process didn't cost any money. It doesn't even take a lot of time. Like, that's easy. Like, it's not the only thing you'll do, but we can start moving the needle right away.
You know what I find interesting about the silo metaphor is people typically picture it as really guardrails. These are our guardrails here. These are our guardrails. But Jamie, have you ever walked into an empty grain silo and yodeled? It's a huge echo chamber. So those silos are all talking to each other and, on board with that silo, but not outside of the silo. And I like to think of, or I use the metaphor of storytelling as the Velcro for collaboration, because Velcro has that hook, and loop system. Good ideas on both sides, but that stories bring them together. And so now you have a third, more stronger common bond using story. How do you use stories or convince your customers to use storytelling to help tear down some of these silos and echo chambers and get that collaboration you look for, so that you're overcoming some of these destructive patterns?
Yeah. So when we're working with an organization to change their culture, the first step is to see the patterns, right, that we've been talking about. Like, sort of once that's visible and you start realizing, oh, wow, of course, this is how we are. No wonder we're having these problems, right? Then I'm like, well, we need to fix this. What are we going to do? And they all want to go right into action planning. I'm like, time out. Write me up some cultural priorities. Like, what are your priorities right now? Give me 2 to 5 priorities that say, of all the patterns and everything that's going on, which are the ones that we need to address now? And they're like, okay, well, we think we're going to do silos and collaboration as one, or, innovation can be one. I'm like, that's great. That's just the name of it. I need a description. I need a description that says, what is this? What is the innovation challenge that we have in our culture right now? Right? Why? And then why is it important? Why, if we fixed this innovation pattern, why would that help us succeed? And that's interestingly one of the hardest parts for them. They don't want to talk about that. And for me, it's so important to say, look, for me, it's the story. It's like, look, we're not just picking this stuff randomly. We know that we have this pattern and this is going on in our organization. And we've seen that when we have that, it causes these problems. And if we could do this differently, we would fix these problems. And that's why we are going to undertake a culture change initiative to do these kind of things, right? Like, and if you, and actually after the paragraph that says, what is it and why is it important? Then I do I ask for 7 to 10 bullet points. What are the behaviors that we would see if we were already doing this? If we've already solved this problem, how would we notice that inside our organization? Well, people would not be saying it's not my job. We would be celebrating failure on a regular basis. Like, we would be constantly learning from testing things. Like, those are not even great behaviors. I want them a little more tangible than that. But things that people could say, oh yeah, I would see that. I would know when I see that. And so that sort of brings it home. It's like, that's when we know we've done it. And I have them do all of that work before they do one action plan, right? Where they're like, we need to do an innovation day, or we need to measure our experiments inside the organization and see how many we're running. Those are great plays. We sort of use the playbook metaphor, right? You write some plays for your playbook. I love those plays, but I don't want to hear about those until I know, like, we've told the really clear story about what this is and why we're doing it.
Yeah. Would you pull one of your case studies from your new book and share it with us? Talk us through it that demonstrates this in action.
Yeah. So for the collaboration culture pattern I talked about, awkward collaboration, there's a small nonprofit that we worked with in Chicago. They're the American Association of Endodontists, actually. So if you've ever had a root canal, your endodontist probably is a member of this organization. So, but they're a staff of about 30. They're pretty small. They saw their sort of awkward collaboration pattern. And even though there are only 30 people, and I've done a lot of work with small organizations. Small organizations have just as rigid silos as large organizations. Like, even when there's a one-person department, it can be a pretty rigid silo. And they weren't sort of off the chart with rigid silos, but they were struggling. And they said, we need to get clear on this. And this is sort of a theme I pulled out later when I was doing my research there. But their overarching approach to getting rid of silos was to reduce cognitive load, right? So cognitive load is just, you can only have so much in your brain before you can't pay attention to anymore. And if you put too much on there, you'll shut down.
So what
right?
kind of stuff would they remove?
They did sort of a small piece and then a big piece. The small piece was implementing the RACI model. And I don't know if you've heard of the RACI model, but it's just decision-making roles. It's RACI. So
What's it stand for?
Yeah. Responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Those are the only 4 decision-making roles. And responsible is the decision maker. Someone told me, Jamie, you're responsible for making this decision. Great, that's my decision. Accountable is my boss, because the accountable person can veto the decision, right? Like, I mean, that's just the rule. If the boss like, hey, whoa, I don't like where this is going, I think like, then we're okay, you're right, boss, we're not going to do that. So a lot of people think they're accountable, but they're not. They want to be able to veto. And I'm like, nope,
Gotcha.
sorry, you don't. That's not your role. Consulted means I must consult you before I make the decision, but I don't have to listen to your advice, for the record. All the consulted ones think they're all actually responsible. We have to agree on this. If we have to agree, that's fine. Then we're both R's in that system. And informed is you don't get to come to the meetings. Okay, we will inform you when this decision is made. That's definitely going to happen. You don't have to worry about that. But you do not have to ask what we're doing or how we're in, or come to the meeting or that kind of thing. Like, and they didn't do this on every decision that gets made in the organization, but they made an effort to clarify the roles in certain contexts, particularly where there was cross-functional friction, right? And once the roles are clear, like, and once I know I'm consulted, and you're like, hey, Jamie, I need to consult you on this project. I'm like, oh, okay, I think you're doing it all wrong, and I think you should do it like this. They're like, thanks for sharing. We're going to keep with our original plan. No problem. You know what I mean? Like, it takes the drama out of it. I'm not like, I know my role. You wanted my opinion. I'm going to share it with you, right? Like, so that sped things up for them. The bigger thing they did that made a big difference was with cognitive load was really doubling down on project management. So again, only 30 people. I think they did project management fairly well, but every department did it differently. So there was no visibility. And so they invested in a consultant and training and software and a whole new process to make sure everyone did project management the same way and that it was all visible. And so it used to be that I would ask them, someone in another department, for help. They would say yes, because we have a culture where we help each other. Then we get closer and closer to the deadline. I'm not getting what I need from this person. And I asked them, like, yeah, I'm sorry, but my boss needed me for something and it was crunch time and I apologize, I couldn't do it. And we would blame them as being sort of sabotagers, or this department doesn't get it. It would, again, generate friction. Once they could see everybody's workload, then I know not to go ask that person for help, because I can see they're in crunch time, or that they will be at the time that I need the deliverable, right? And once I see that, I ask them for different kind of help. Like, hey, I know you're going to be busy, so can I just get this from you? Yes, I can do that. And then they deliver, right? And so the collaboration across functions, once I don't have to calculate everything in my head, once I'm not wondering why people are doing things, once I'm not having to guess who's busy and who's not, right? All of that stuff is going on in my head. It makes for difficult collaboration. You take all that out, and actually it's really easy. And so
let's run down that cognitive load rabbit hole for just a minute, because it's something you've brought up that I have not thought about before. And I'm curious, in your 20 plus years of doing this change management work for cultures, is there more cognitive load now on everybody, given the amount of information we consume, or don't even consume, that we are bombarded with online, and then that carries over into the offline in-person world?
Yeah, I mean, I think what is different today cognitive load's been around forever, and I've read about it in sort of the business world for a long time. I do think with the internet revolution and the mobile phone revolution and the screen revolution, that we are bombarding ourselves with things that fill up our cognitive load and aren't recognizing the impact that that's having. I mean, to some extent we do. People are like, I got to turn my screens off, for a certain amount of time. Like, we get that there's a dynamic. I don't think we understand literally how much it's reducing our ability to decide things.
Well, what about exhaustion, the energy depletion, the lack of sleep that leads to that, because our brains can't shut off, that then just kicks in that vicious cycle. I got to get up on Tuesday morning and do it all again.
My favorite story around cognitive load is, and this was about Obama when he was president, although I don't think this is limited to him as president. But when he was president, in the residence at the White House, in his closet, he had only 2 colors of suit. He could wear a gray suit or a blue suit, and that was it. And he had like 2 ties and white shirt and gray shirt. That was it. He had multiple shirts and suits. Like, it's not like he had one suit he wore, but he did not have to choose what to wear.
He had a home and an away jersey, basically.
Basically, because he had so many decisions that he had to make in that job. If you threw like, hey, maybe I should wear paisley today. Like, no, they took that off his plate in order to free up space. Actually, the head-up display in fighter jets, right? That so you can see, which they now have in cars. My friend has a BMW that has this now. I was driving his car and suddenly I can see my speed in the windshield. I'm like, wow, that's new. That was invented because literally your brain will reduce the amount of information it can hold at any one time if you turn your head. Mm-hmm. Turning your head reduces it by like 10%. And so by not turning my head, by putting these numbers on the screen in front of me, it allows me to keep more in my head. It's the same concept with cognitive load. There will be a limit. So with cognitive load, you pull out things that are going to push you above the limit. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. That's what this organization did with their project management system. But it is, I'm concerned that it is only going to get worse, right? Like, the pace of change is not slowing down. I actually think AI, since we talked about that, could help because it is the kind of thing where you can simply say, I don't have all the data, but here's what I know. Give me some advice and help me think this through. That can sort of take some of the other things.
Well, without question, yeah. Because like I was even saying, the cognitive load of our story cycle system process over months is reduced down to minutes, essentially, and taking that load out. Now I had a friend of mine who's written several books, and he told me the other day, he said, I hate writing from that blank page. I hate having to come up with the original ideas and do this. I know where I want my book to go. Now I have AI to write the first draft, and I love editing and rewriting and reorganizing. So he plays to his strengths, getting rid of that cognitive load with AI in that case, and now I can use it for the things I really care about and can do very, very well.
Now, we're actually doing the same thing that you did with our culture change methodology and building an AI platform that is in testing right now because we are, I hate the phrase eating our own dog food, but whatever. We're following our own advice and showing it to people and sort of figuring out where it's going to go because we had that same epiphany. It's like you don't need 6 months to really understand your culture patterns, write your priorities, and develop your action plans. You can take 6 months if you want to. And the reason to do that is because you want to involve a lot of people in it, right? If you want to involve a lot of people, it's going to take more time, but it's going to also be stickier. That's great. But if you need to move fast, you can do this in like 3 days. You know what I mean? So.
And you had said something earlier about when you first sat down with that client in your case study about getting them to write down, be very, very specific on what it is that they were trying to do and behaviors that they're trying to change and so forth. And we always like to say the power of story rests in the specifics. If you tell me a general, boring story, it's like this cognitive load mush that I just want to get rid of by totally ignoring you. So it sounds like, too, the more specific you can be, it's kind of funny. Actually, it seems like it would add more cognitive load, but it doesn't. It takes away from it because you know exactly what it is you're expected to be doing.
Yeah, there was a different organization that struggled with some of the same issues or similar issues that we worked with. One of their cultural priorities, like usually when organizations come up with a cultural priority, it's got a fairly boring name. Like we need to, collaboration and silos, or innovation and creating new value. Like that's fine. You don't have to have a super amazing name. One that jumped out at me early on was a priority that says, at our organization, everyone has a voice, but not everyone decides. And because they also implemented the RACI model, but what their issue is not necessarily about cognitive load. What they realized is, as an organization, a part of their origin story was they broke off from another organization because their little component did not have a voice, right? They're like, we're not getting a voice and we have important things we need to do. So we're going to create our own organization and pursue our own objectives. And so having a voice was super important to them. What they didn't realize is that over time, because they grew, everyone having a voice meant everyone came to every meeting, right? And suddenly everything took a lot longer. And their customers, they're a nonprofit, but their stakeholders were coming back to them several years later saying, you guys are too slow. You used to keep us ahead of the curve. That's why we kept going to you for answers. Now, by the time you release something, we already knew it. And they realized, oh, it's because they had overvalued having a voice thing. It started generating this, it's like systems thinking. Like, you don't know that this thing happening over on the left ends up generating this result way over here on the right. And they're like, it's because that voice thing. So they weren't going to give up having a voice. That's still central to their culture. But they wanted to be clear that's not the same as deciding. And so they streamlined their decision-making processes to get the speed again without people feeling like they were being totally excluded and wouldn't have a voice. But they realized, I can't have a voice in everything if we're going to be this fast. And so that story, the story they told around, here's why we became a separate organization in the first place that was so important. Here's how that behavior is actually causing problems that we didn't see until right now that our stakeholders are telling us, and that's why we're moving here. Like, that's the kind of thing that people go, oh, I get it, I'm on board, right? I'm not going to resist that change. People tell me all the time, oh, people resist change. I'm like, no, they don't. They resist doing things they think are stupid, right? They resist doing things they think are not in their interests. But if you can tell a clear and compelling story that says, no, I know we did it this way and it used to work. Here's why this is not working now. If we do it this way, you'll get the results you want. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so that piece is super important to me.
And so what you're saying about giving everyone a voice, but then also making decisions in a timely manner, which means fewer voices when it comes ultimately down to decision making, is really a fine balance between democracy and autocracy. You've got to find it, and I suppose that balance fulcrum is a little bit different depending on what the organization is.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I encourage organizations to almost be a little bit more honest about. It's like the other part of the story comes up for me is when I'm talking about what culture is and how it lives inside an organization. And one, you'll love this too. I tell this when I give a speech on this. Human beings make sense of the world through story, right? And so you have to have a story of what your culture is. And then I ask people, I'm like, so if I was interviewing a job and I said, hey, what's your culture there? Like, what would you say? And they all like, our culture's good. We have a great culture. Like, they have no answer to this. I'm like, no, you got to be specific. Tell me that you have a culture that is rapidly focused on collaboration and everyone's on cross-functional teams and we all work on tables together so we can overhear what other people are working on, because that helps us collaborate better, right? And I'm like, because if I was going to interview for a job, maybe I would hate that. I don't want that. I want to put my headphones in and just work. But now that you told me what the culture is, thank you. I don't want the job. Like, you want to rule those people out. And then I flip it around. I'm like, but you can have a story that says we are rapidly siloed here. We stay in our swim lanes. We do not get distracted by the work of other departments, because when we do that, we are much more responsive to our customers, and they love that. And that's what distinguishes us from our competitors. So if you want to be on collaborative teams and work on open space offices, you're not going to like it here, right? So make sure that you make that connection between the way your culture operates and why it makes you succeed. And that'll help attract the right people. And also that just sort of reinforces the behaviors you're looking for to begin with.
What percentage of companies have that culture story down, nailed? You walk in and they tell it to you and you go, right on, we've got something to work with here. And what percentage don't?
I'm making these numbers up, just so you know. This is not research based. This is anecdotal and intuitive. I would say less than 5% do it really well. I think I think maybe sort of like, so the top 5%, they're out there. There are organizations that have really done the culture work, and they're really clear, and everybody in the organization can tell you what it is.
Who would you point to? Like,
in back in the day, Zappos was probably the poster child for that. They were so clear on their culture of customer service, and they not only told the story really well, like they have core values. I have a love-hate relationship with core values. I think so many of them are just lame, right? And they're just on the wall, and you don't really know what they mean. There was like they didn't just say customer service is a core value. Their number one core value is something like, we wow the customer with service. Like literally, I want people to hang up the phone with Zappos and go, wow. Right? Yeah. Like that's clearer to me. And they back it up with behavior. This is 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know if they still do it, but if any job that you got at Zappos, you had to go through customer service training and then spend 2 weeks on the phones, right? Like you can't not love customer service and work here, right? But they had like 10 values, including being a little weird. That was one of their values. And they could explain why. And in Tony Hsieh's book, he explains and tells stories about it. So I think they would nail it. I think some of the organizations that we write about in our books are there. They've got a whole methodology. When millennials take over, one of the case studies is a healthcare company in Omaha, Nebraska. They have an entire methodology around their culture, and they nominate the top 1% of people who live the culture really well to be in a team that gets regular training on it. They're trained on what it is and what their culture is and why they do these things this way, because everyone knows that those people are the people you go to. If you're in that moment of like, I'm not sure what I should do here, let me ask so-and-so, and they'll say, well, in our culture, we would do it like this.
They become the culture ambassadors.
Yes. And so I see those, but they are rare. Most organizations have sort of that 2-sentence description of their culture. They maybe have a poster with some acronym like TACT or, WOW, or I don't know, something that's like, this is what our culture is about. They tend to lack the behavior part, and they tend to lack the why. There was one client I worked with had a core value. One of them was tenacity, and which is fine. You can have tenacity as a core value, but when I would ask them what their core values are, I can't remember the other ones, but there's collaboration and accountability, and transparency, and what's the other one? Oh yeah, and tenacity. Like it was always like that, because no one there knew what it meant. Like, does it mean I'm aggressive? Does it mean we hold each other accountable? Like, what does it mean? And so a very large percent of the organizations have an idea of what their culture is about at a conceptual level, but aren't good at really explaining it in a way that drives behavior.
Yeah, telling that story, yeah.
And at least
absolutely.
And then there's at least the bottom 25% don't even pay attention to culture at all. It's not on their radar. They don't think it's important. They have other things to track to make them successful. And again, those are.
I might add to your list of the top culture companies that at least I have seen. Patagonia, I think, has a really amazing culture that they live by. Airbnb has. I don't know if it is waning a little bit, because I think they were like the ultimate storytelling brand, and they kind of have lost that a little bit for whatever reason, but I think that culture's still there. And then one I recently experienced, and I don't even know what their core values are at all, but you've heard of Rick Steves and the Rick Steves tours over in Europe and whatever.
Oh, okay.
He's amazing. He's out of the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Seattle, so I've known him. He's been doing this for decades. And my wife and I went on our very first Rick Steves tour this past October over in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And we went with some friends who had been on 2 other Rick Steves tours to Italy and London, and said, oh, these are fantastic. You're going to love it. And we aren't really touring type people. We like to go to countries on our own and then, be the explorer. But we said, well, let's try it. The universe is inviting us. We better go. Let's see what it's all about. Well, I got to tell you, Jamie, talking about a culture, we got to Cologne, Germany. We had 28 people in our group, and was led by a German, Matti. He was fantastic. And he went around the room. people were introducing themselves, and I was blown away that Michelle and I were like the only couple that had never been on a Rick Steves tour. Some of these people had been on 13, 14, 15 of them. Some of them had just left one tour, joined ours, and are now going on to the next one. And they talk about Rick Steves as if he was their best buddy, traveling companion, that I went and asked him. I said, "Oh, have you met Steve?" "Oh, no." Or Rick, I should say. Rick Steve? "No, never met him. Never met him. See his videos, been through all of this. I hear him." And I was so blown away by that brand and how these people have so fully adopted what he stands for, that they become an extension of his own culture of adventure and living life, on the road and checking things out. It was one of the most powerful brands I'd ever seen, and especially if you chalk it up to another Seattleite, Jeff Bezos, who says your story or your brand are the things that people say about you when you're not in the room. I have since revised that to say your brand is actually the stories people tell about you when you're not in the room, and it all begins with the culture. And you got to be able to really deliver on those cultural promises.
Yeah. No, and the people often say, well, this comes from the top, right? Like it doesn't the CEO sort of set the culture? Isn't that, the job? And it's a little bit of a yes and no question. I mean, yes and no answer, because the CEO can't do the culture on its own. Right? Like it is up to all the other people leading the tours that are living the culture. Like those behaviors are driving that culture, but the CEO can kill it in a heartbeat. Right? And so that's when I work with the leaders, it's like, okay, you can set your vision for the culture. And if you do, you have to be really clear, again, down to the behavior level about how that's going to work. And then you just have to model it and reinforce it. And beware that every little behavior you do, people are going to interpret that as having a message about the culture, right? So like you have to be much more, your whole senior team has to pay much more attention to their behaviors and make sure that when you have that story about what your culture is, you're not also condoning behavior at the senior level that's not quite there, right? Because that will kill it in a minute. And so that is also something I've seen consistently with the people that do it really well. It's not only telling a clear and compelling story, they are holding everyone, particularly the senior level, accountable to the specific behaviors that reflect that story. Because if its words and actions are different, the actions win. You know what I mean? Particularly, again, at the top.
Yeah. Well, stories are all about change. If you have no change and transformation happening in a story, you don't have a story, and that's true with culture today. Is culture today changing faster than it ever has before?
I think it should be changing faster than it ever has before. I don't think enough organizations are paying attention to how they need to manage their culture on an ongoing basis. But that is more the framework for me than changing a culture. And really, it's like we are constantly managing finance in organizations, right? Like you don't get to say, I'm too busy, I'm not going to look at finance for the next 2 years, right? You're going to do finance. You're going to manage the finance. It's not all the time, but you're going to do it. We need to be doing the same thing with culture, because we need to be making significant changes to it on a more frequent basis, right? Because the environment changes. Again, I don't mean to harp on AI, but it's been such a revolution, and it will continue to be such a revolution given the pace of change on this stuff. Think back a few years ago when we didn't have what we have now. Like it feels like 10 years ago. It was like 2, right? Like it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't do these things, and now we can. What are the implications for how you do your work inside an organization and how you deliver value to your customers and your stakeholders? That's changing rapidly. So your cultural behaviors probably need to shift. Right. Again, with if you really are going to have AI become more central in your life and in an organization, you're going to have to learn how to experiment, period. That's just it. And that's culture change. And that's like saying, hey, folks, we are moving our culture in this direction. Here are these new processes we're doing. I know it's different than it was before, but we're not going to be successful if we don't do this. You can tell that really clear and compelling story. Then we're shifting the culture. And we should be, I tell everyone I work with, I want your culture change management time horizon to be 3 months. I want rolling 3-month strategies for your culture change, because 3 months from now, what you think is important may not be important. And so, and it may still be important, that's fine, but you can still have some, year-long plans, maybe in the 2-year horizon, I want to be working these things in our culture. That's fine. But the rubber hits the road on 90 days. What do we do? What are the priorities for these next 3 months, this next quarter on our culture change to make sure we're on top of things? I think it's these areas. Great. After 3 months, we're going to look at that and see if that's still true and see what we need to switch for next quarter. Like that's the pace I think that culture change is happening now, or should be happening. And it doesn't require transformation in 3 months. Some cultures do require big change. Most don't. Most need significant change, but not like, it's a totally new place. It's totally different now. We just need to shift attention from this area over to this area now, because that's going to make us more successful. So the change is more continuous and managed as opposed to disruptive and transformational for the most part. And again, we tend to see culture change as like, this big thing. And it can be big if you want it. And I've seen big culture change, but that's not what most of it is.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is life is completely accelerated around us. AI is bringing a lot of that acceleration into play. Don't overthink it. Give yourself 3-month time horizons to be checking in and seeing how you are evolving your organization, which may evolve over the course of a couple of years, but you've got these 3-month milestones, and you now have a book out with your co-author, Maddie, Culture Change Made Easy. Where can people get that?
That is on Amazon, both Kindle and print on demand. And it's been out on Kindle since April of 2024, but more recently the print version is out. We're excited about that.
That's great. And where can people learn more about you and your work, Jamie?
So my website is propelnow.co. No M at the end of that one. I always get people autocorrecting. It's not .com, it's .co. We thought that would be really useful for people to remember to not put the M. But propelnow.co is our consulting company, and jamienaughter.com is my speaker site.
Excellent. Well, Jamie, thanks so much for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. I've had a great time.
And have a great 2025.
Thanks.
Wow, that was an amazing show. Thank you so much for listening to it. And please share it with anyone you know in a leadership role that is trying to manage, embrace, and ignite change in their organizations. And of course, you could do me a huge favor if you jump over to iTunes and give us a rating and review, a thumbs up, if you will, because it helps us get found out there. If I can help you and your team excel through the stories you tell through change management, sales, marketing, leadership, and learning and development, well, please shoot me a note to park@businessofstory.com. If you're a regular listener, you know I present my trainings either in person, virtual, or as a hybrid. And of course, you can take our ABTs of Storytelling micro training course right now at businessofstory.com/ABT to help you start upskilling your own abilities and becoming a compellingly clear communicator. Thanks, Caden Howell, for editing the show, Darius Holbert for our amazing music, and for Marissa Hill always being by my side in the marketing and community development right here. Hey, 2025 is here, and that might mean a career change and or applying for a new job for you. Career advocate Amanda Miller will be here next Monday to show you how to land your ideal position using your accomplishment stories and how, when, and where to tell them, from networking to LinkedIn to your job interview. Even if you're not looking for a new job in the new year, you're going to love this show because Amanda shares her secrets on how to create the most powerful LinkedIn profile you can possibly imagine. So I hope to see you there. Until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So kick off 2025 by telling yourself the greatest, most outrageous story of achievement and success that you can possibly imagine. Why not? So happy New Year, and thanks so much for listening.